Thanks very much for that, Dana. It was a fantastic talk. Now, it's interesting, you know, I lived in South Australia for a number of years, and we could actually grow up to 10 cannabis plants then, and I can remember it being a really wonderful experience to be able to grow your own sort of plants in your own backyard, and that was under the Sackville Royal Commission and just their laws to decriminalise cannabis in South Australia, and I think that's probably the best situation that's ever existed in Australia. People were just growing plants in their backyard and they could do whatever they want with them, and I think that's probably, in many ways, better than what we're going to get under regulation. I really sort of worry about what's going to happen with regulation, and I tend to think decriminalisation might be better. Anyway, our next speaker is... Oh, and also, look, Dana's got several books over there, including Harry Pothead and the Marijuana Stone. What's the other one? It's
Green Buds and Hash.
Green Buds and Hash.
Marijuana Stone and Cannabis in Canada, the Illustrated History.
Yeah, and the Cannabis in Canada Illustrated History, which has got a lot of sort of really interesting stories about cannabis activists in Canada, and it's a sort of cartoon book. It's this amazing sort of graphic novel, or not so much a novel, but a graphic sort of book. And our next speaker is going to be Ajia May Moon. I hope I got that right. Good. Ajia is the creator of WeedWoman, founder of 12 High Chicks, which is also... Oh, it's there now. She's just only got a copy to display, but it's a magazine she produces, and it's also a Facebook... Is it Facebook page or not?
There's a Facebook page, it's also online as well.
Yeah. And she's been a medical and recreational cannabis activist since 2005, as well as an active member of the New Democratic Party of Canada since 2010. She has won second place Indica Bud and second place Hybrid Bud at the 2014 Prairie Medicinal Harvest Cup in Saskatchewan, and got third place in extracts at the 2014 Kush Cup, Vancouver, Canada, and second place in extracts at the 2015 Kush Cups, Vancouver. Last year she got a chance to speak at the Mardi Gras in Nimbin, Hemp Fest in Washington, USA, the Prairie Medicinal Harvest Cup in Saskatoon, and since the closure of her dispensary, which she'll probably tell us about, Three Happy Cats was the name of the dispensary, Ajia has been focusing on 12 High Chicks. So some applause for her.
I guess I'll start with how I got involved in the cannabis community. I was born with a disability that made it so that I couldn't walk. It took them 12 years to correct my legs from a position where I couldn't walk to being able to walk with assistance. And then by the time I was 12, I was able to walk on my own. Unfortunately, during that process, there was a lot of damage done to my knees and my hips and some other aspects to my legs that have put me in a position where I have chronic pain. And unfortunately, opiates were just making me sick. I was unable to work. I was unable to function. And of course, I was just stoned off my tree, so that didn't leave me in a very good position. I eventually turned to medical marijuana, and it brought me to life, basically. I got off the couch, I got a job, I became a real person. And at that point, I was pretty happy. And then I started noticing that there was a lot of unjust laws in Canada, especially within my province, about marijuana and medical marijuana. I think the first protest I attended was 2007 with a couple of friends from Langley. And we stood outside the Conservatives building in Langley, and his name was Mark Warawara. And he was passing a bill, C-26 at the time, or their party was, which would create mandatory minimums for those trafficking and cultivating marijuana. And after I stood there and spoke with this Conservative member of Parliament, I realized that this belief was widespread throughout their party, and unfortunately they were the ones in power in Canada. And the only way to really make bad laws change is to get involved. So I took it up a step further than that. I actually met Dana during this time where I was trying to get more involved, and he helped me get on the right path. And at one point, he tells me we should join the NDP. You need to join. You need to help me pass some of these marijuana laws. And this is when I went full throttle in getting involved in the marijuana and the medical marijuana scene. We showed up at the NDP convention in 2011. I believe we ended up attaching what you were trying to achieve onto a different policy, and they pushed it through that way, which was quite fantastic to watch. I didn't really pay attention to politics. I was kind of afraid of politics. I got a crash course on how federal and provincial politics worked over that weekend that we were at convention. It was quite cool to watch a whole bunch of young people get together and, overthrow the table and then make things happen. So after that experience, I moved on to opening up a dispensary. I felt more brave because I met other like-minded people that were also opening dispensaries or had ones that were going on. So I opened up my company called the Three Happy Cats. And during that time when we were first opening, we weren't sure if we were going to do storefront or if we were going to do online sales. And after 2014, it was April 1st, actually. What a funny day to pick, too. The federal government had decided that storefront dispensaries were illegal. We were supposed to dispose of our grows, and we were supposed to buy weed from the licensed producers. So at that time, I decided I would not have a storefront, and I would sell medical marijuana through online sales only, which has proven to be problematic now because the city, which is a different regulatory system than what our federal government has, decided to do the opposite of what the federal government was saying was correct. So one thing was the storefronts were being allowed in Vancouver, but no mail order was supposed to be operating out of Vancouver. They later lightened up if you had storefront. You could do the online stuff, but it was supposed to be kind of hush-hush. And then during that process, we received a letter from Health Canada letting us know that we were not to operate as an online store. And then we were being told by the city we weren't supposed to operate as an online store. This made things quite difficult, and so I decided I would change from being a dispensary to running a vapor lounge, which has been even more problematic because trying to prove to the city that I'm not running a dispensary and that I do genuinely want a business license. I actually just got my business license during the time that I was in Nimbin. I got a phone call letting me know that you've got it, though we're not supposed to run our vapor lounge. So it's going to be fun, but I'm just going to go with the civil disobedient way and just keep it going anyways, and hopefully nothing too bad comes of running that vapor lounge when I get home. So many things have happened in the last year, actually. I started making this online publication called 12 High Chicks, which is now a beautiful print. We were here in Nimbin last year. We went to the States. We met so many like-minded people in America. And then we traveled throughout Canada and met some other like-minded people there as well. I definitely think the key to change when it comes to marijuana, even recreational marijuana, is banding together with your fellow people. And I also think that joining and infiltrating politics to a certain extent is also a good idea. Because if you can hit these laws at the root, you can definitely change the laws a lot quicker. It's just getting involved. It's a lot easier to show up at a protest than it is to join a political party and try and write policy and make change. I've never personally written policy, but I've certainly helped vote in policy. There's a lot of things in Canada I didn't realize were going on as well when I went to that convention. I learned about how there wasn't water going to certain parts of our country during the cold season and they needed it. There was no water, period. And so I went and voted that in as well. I learned about a lot of hardships that were happening across the country, which was kind of blew my mind, actually, that we weren't getting water in certain parts of our country. I guess the best experiences all led to this book, though. I had people tell me their stories from around Canada and America. And eventually, we just kind of put it together and created this book. When I first started putting this together, though, I didn't realize that publicizing things about recreational marijuana, or medical marijuana for that matter, were not legal. So I find myself yet again being disobedient to the system. I actually published this and then I submitted it to the Canadian Book Association for 2016. They accepted it, they took a copy, and nothing else was said in regards to the content being illegal, so that's pretty cool, I think. I guess during this adventure as well, it bonded a lot of people together that we never really met. Like we would meet one person here and they would show us a couple of groups within their community doing stuff. And getting together was really like the best thing that we could have done. Spread a lot of like-minded ideas amongst people, got other people involved that were kind of scared to come forward. And, you know, some parts are scary, you know, but you just kind of have to tough it out and go from there. I had one experience that wasn't cannabis related to begin with, but during that process, the government stepped in. They called Child Protective Services on me because I had tested positive for marijuana in the hospital. And it came down to me getting my medical marijuana certificate or my license, which I wasn't really planning on doing, but I ended up getting my MMAR, which was something that was introduced into Canada in 2001, allowing medical patients to have a legal way to smoke marijuana and possess it. They gave me a license for 10 grams a day, which was like 300 grams I could possess on me at a time. I'm just kind of looking at this bag going, there's no way I could smoke all this at once. And that's eventually when Child Protective Services actually backed down. It was quite the adventure, actually. I ended up leaving the country. I gave my kids to other people on paper. We all met in Mexico, and we stayed there for a couple of months while my friend Jade Ridge, who's one of the writers in this book, got me a medical marijuana license because of my legs. I was granted a B1, which is like the easiest and highest form of a medical marijuana license you can get. And then eventually we got an apology letter from Child Protective Services letting us know that they have closed the case and that they no longer feel that I'm endangering my children with marijuana because now it's medical, which is pretty crazy. Is that a...
No, just search your mind,
I thought that was a question. All right, fair enough. You know, we look pretty liberal, but we do have some places where it can be pretty dark and scary with medical marijuana as well as recreational marijuana. We have people where they're, you know, treating their children for epilepsy and other problems with marijuana, but it's not legal for them to do so, and it's really incredible to watch these people put their own freedoms at risk to make sure that their children are okay. There's actually a wonderful woman I met in Seattle named Erin Purchase who pushed those boundaries and eventually got a marijuana license for her daughter, but it's a little bit different in the States because they don't have a federal program. It's run by the state. So federally, it's not okay, but within certain states it is. So they actually ran from one state to another so that they could be medical marijuana refugees, as they put it, and start over. That girl now, Michaela, has grown quite a bit and is well and has chased all the cancer out of her system with the help of marijuana, and it's an incredible story. I'm hoping to catch more of her this year when we head down to Washington. I've been asked to speak again at HempFest, so that'll be fun to do, that's for sure. During my adventures, I met a lot of women in the cannabis community. I mean, I've met some men as well, but there's so many women involved now. I mean, I came into the community a little bit later in life. I didn't get to see the 90s where things were really hectic and scary. I didn't come along till 2005 when everything was kind of mellow and everything had been set in the tone that we're just not going to touch marijuana if they don't have to. These women have shared some really incredible stories. I've met a lot of people actually from the States that have had to move as a result of their use of marijuana, which is interesting. We don't really have to worry about that in Canada. You get a federal license, that's it. But we've had some interesting changes to our federal program. We once had the MMAR, which is now frozen as a result of an injunction, but it's still there. We won that injunction to be able to keep growing your own medicine at home, which is pretty awesome. But there's an MMPR program that's running kind of coexisting with that, which is a little different. You can't grow your own. You can only smoke the medicine that you purchase from these licensed producers. But I guess a program is better than no program at all. I believe you guys have 8 people in your medical marijuana program of all of Australia. That's a very small number, same as America. They have 8 people left from their federal program, then that's it. They get a tin full of joints, and they're lucky to be grandfathered into that program, and there's no new people going into the American federal program. It's kind of sad, actually. I'm not really sure what it takes for America to move forward and get a new federal program, but certainly we've pushed the boundaries to get it going and to move forward with it. In Canada, they're proposing some new regulations and stuff that should be in for spring, but it's not necessarily going to make medical marijuana or recreational marijuana legal by next spring. Just going to create legislation that will eventually pave the way for legal cannabis. A lot of people in our city, Vancouver, don't even think about marijuana being legal. I mean, you can go outside, smoke a joint, walk by a cop while still smoking that joint, and likely they're just going to tell you to put it out. I've never really had any problems with any police except for when I was in Revelstoke, and even then they opened up my trunk. They said I was trafficking. I said, no, they're all in different bags because that's juicy fruit, that's purple kush, and I named off all the names, and he's like, you're a cheeky monkey. took my federal license with him to his car, then came back and returned all my medicine and said, smoke it responsibly and have a nice day. So once you have that pink paper, it really changes things in Canada, that's for sure. Once upon a time, you used to get a card, but I got into the program so late that they stopped issuing cards. You have to carry this ridiculous giant pink piece of paper with you that you can't laminate or alter in any way or form, otherwise it's void, and now there's no place to get it reprinted, which makes it even worse. So mine is tacked together with tape on the back, hoping that no one will notice. It's got a little bit of weed bit stuck in the tape from rolling on it, because that was the first thing I did when I got it. It was actually quite funny. Got it in the mail, got this big piece of paper. I was like, you know what we need to do? We need to smoke a joint. I just kind of put it in my lap and started breaking it up, and that was my first legal marijuana cigarette. That was pretty cool, actually. Now that it's been a little while, I've been guided through 3 pregnancies on federal medical marijuana, which have been really great. My first pregnancy ever, I used the chemical gravel and some other things they prescribed, and my daughter was born with a hemangioma tumor in her right hand. So I'm not sure what's better and what's not, but certainly I've had no problems with my other 2 where I used just medicinal marijuana. They're happy, they're healthy, they were huge babies. And this one I'm hoping for the same. But some doctors in Canada are afraid to prescribe it while you're pregnant, that's for sure. And some doctors are completely open to it. My doctor has also prescribed Nabalone, which is a pharmaceutical version of marijuana as well, because she wants to prevent as much smoking as possible. And is also recommending that I continue to use the dry plant, which is pretty cool. Her name is Dr. Stephanie, actually. I met her just kind of by accident. And then I showed her my license, and I got her more involved in marijuana. And now she has several patients that all use marijuana under her guidance. And I have people coming out from 40, 50 minutes away just to drive to her to talk to her about marijuana. She's a pretty cool chick, actually. Langley's a very small place. That's where I was born. I just didn't know marijuana was illegal there because people just didn't really talk about it. And then I got older and I started realizing, wow, this is actually a problem, that this is illegal. And people do get busted all the time, but it's not like they're facing serious charges. Normally they're dismissed. I think the statistic was 2,500 people have been arrested in the last year for marijuana possession or just for marijuana crimes themselves under Trudeau's ruling, which is kind of crazy for me considering he made all these promises about, making marijuana legal, and people are still going to jail for it. The mandatory minimums were actually just they were ruled as unconstitutional in Canada, which makes hopefully a gateway for change a lot sooner than later. But yeah, currently right now we have mandatory minimums for basically all forms of marijuana, whether it be cultivation, trafficking, or even possession. I'm not sure. Dana? No mandatory minimum for possession. Yeah, I've never been caught for possession, except for when I had my actual pink paper, so I'm not really sure how that goes down. But mandatory minimums are definitely a problem. It's creating issues for people that it just shouldn't be creating issues at all. It's a big tie-up in our court system, and it creates a lot of problems for the people that are dealing with those charges after. Not really sure what else to talk about up here, except for my magazine, really.
Do we want to have that sort of just question and answer with Dana can join you up?
Let's grab your chair, Dana.
Yeah, next to you.
All right, you stand and I'll sit.
All right.
Or get two chairs.
All right.
Make it easy for the person video.
Just for clarity, it's not my baby. People ask me that sometimes. So.
Yeah, that's quite funny. It's happened a lot.
So, question.
Sure. Dana, you mentioned some figures with regards to the cost of police rates. Where did you get those figures? Are they just averages, or are you doing FOI requests?
Well, the Vancouver Police Department was getting some pressure from a anti-marijuana activist in Vancouver who actually goes out of her way to cause a lot of trouble for us. But she was filing things with the city saying you should raid dispensaries and you're being negligent in your duties. And it was the Vancouver Police Department that said, look, it costs us about $30,000 to raid a dispensary and forward charges to the court. And with 100 of them, we just don't have that much money, and nothing really happens anyways. So it's their number. That's the 30 grand figure that I quote as to what it costs to raid a dispensary. It comes from the Vancouver Police Department.
Cool, thank you. And Ajia, I was just wondering if you could tell us more about your pain. Is it bone pain, and what do you find is the most effective way to treat it?
It's probably a mixture of bone and nerve pain, because when they did the operation, they pushed the curve through my ankles and through my kneecaps and concentrated the twists in my femur bones, where they then cut in, they removed all the flesh from my kneecap up to my hip, cut the bone in half, let them untwist, plated them. They put butterflies and a few stitching through my legs, and then paralyzed me from the waist down for 12 months. When I finally got feeling back, it was horrendous. They ended up putting me on like some really crazy stuff. One of them was injectable Demerol, which just wrecked my intestines and also made me very incompetent as a human being. But now I treat that with a combination of the pharmaceutical marijuana as well as dried herb. And then once in a while I'll use like derivatives like hash or butter, which really don't find out here. It's quite interesting, you don't have very much of that. We did find some dabs though in Nimbin. Some, was it Osnails brought us dabs? Yes, Osnails. Let's talk about, that's not what I meant.
There was some death.
But when it's really bad, I'll go to the derivatives. If it's mild, then I'll just smoke a joint in the morning, or I'll just have a little bit here and there.
Do you prefer smoking versus oral consumption, or is there?
I prefer smoking, definitely over the oral consumption. But of course, being pregnant, smoking so much is not a really good plan. The opiates also did a lot of damage to my intestines, where now I have a constant feeling of nausea, even if I'm not pregnant. So I take benabolone in the morning every day and every night before bed. Otherwise, I wake up feeling like I'm going to be very, very sick.
Thank you.
So, MMPR license, what's that stand for?
So there was the history of medical cannabis. MMPR stands for Medical Marijuana Production. MMPR, Medical Marijuana Production Regulations, isn't it? There's the MMAR and the MMPR. And the MMAR was created because people went to court and said, I need medical cannabis and
Medical marijuana
access regulations. The MMAR allows Canadians to have a doctor's prescription or recommendation, not a prescription, to grow their own cannabis or have somebody grow it for them. So if you go to your doctor says, you need 4 grams of cannabis a day. Health Canada would plug that 4 grams into their formula, decide if you're going to go indoors or outdoors, and then say you're allowed to grow 200 plants. And then you're allowed to possess X number of grams on your person once you've grown that. You're allowed to have X number of grams at home. If you grow your plants and you have extra cannabis because your plants are bigger or you yielded too much, you must dispose of the excess, which most people dispose of by rolling it into little tubes and burning it up, or by selling it to their local dispensary. Is very common either. So that was the MMAR. The MMPR was a program that the Conservatives created, and the idea was we're going to stop everyone from growing their own cannabis. You must destroy all your plants, all the medicine you've got stored up for yourself. You must mix with kitty litter and throw it away, and then buy new marijuana from these 24 companies that we've licensed to grow it. And there's 300 more companies waiting to get their permits, but there's 24 companies in Canada now. Some of the biggest ones are called Tilray and Tweed. Those are the 2 biggest ones, and there's a bunch other. And they're permitted to grow cannabis and sell it to patients. So you go to your doctor writes you a recommendation. It's not a prescription. If it was a prescription, they can't charge you GST, they can't tax it, but they do tax it. And if it's prescription under Canada law, your doctor can't charge you for a prescription, but they can charge you for paperwork. And so a lot of doctors will charge $400 or $500 for your medical marijuana recommendation. Then you can only buy from one of these companies. Pick which one you want to buy from. Your doctor assigns you to them, and then you can buy from them what you need. And many people, and that gets you legal. So a lot of patients will do that, get signed up with the company, but they may decide they want to supplement what they buy from that company by going to a local dispensary and buying cannabis there and sticking in the company's prescription bottle, because the doctor or the cop can't tell what medicine's in your bottle or where it came from, right? And you don't have to keep it in that bottle anyways. So, and now we're getting a situation, people go back to their doctor to get it renewed for the next year, and the doctor says, that company told me you're not ordering enough marijuana from them. So I'm not going to renew this unless you promise to only buy from them and stop getting your marijuana wherever you're getting it now. And so this creates this thing. And these companies, some of these doctors are definitely getting kickbacks from these companies because it's very lucrative for them to have you, because it's very difficult to change it. You can theoretically go back to your doctor and get it reassigned to a new company, But there's no opportunity to see or try the medicine before you know if it works for you. You've got to order it all blind. They can only sell it through the mail. And that's the MMPR. And they tried to get rid of the MMAR, letting you grow your own. We went to court and fought that, got an injunction. And so for the last year and a half or so, it's all been frozen, where if you got a permit to grow your own, you're still allowed to keep doing that, but your paperwork will look like it's expired because Health Canada will not renew it. You can't move or change anything. If you want to get a new permit, you can't do that. So it's all kind of frozen in place. And our lawyers say, well, yeah, if you move to a new location and you start growing there and you get charged and go to court, you'll win in court because you needed to move when you couldn't. But it's not going to stop the cops from trashing your grow room and raiding everything, right? But we just won in court. It was like a huge court case. We just won a few months ago. And the Supreme Court ordered the federal government to reinstitute that program and start it up again. And they've got a few more months, and they're supposed to, within a few months, now have a system where anybody who wants to grow their own can go back there and reapply to grow their own and have this open up. And there's going to be thousands and thousands of people backlogged wanting to work through it. And what they would often do is they would honor the letter but not the spirit by not having enough bureaucrats working in the Health Canada department to manage all the paperwork. So go, yeah, we're letting you do it. There's just one guy working there with a huge inbox and he can barely get to your stuff. So they would do things like that. But we're hoping the Liberals who promised to legalize will actually be fair about this and not play all the games the Conservatives played. But so far they've done nothing, so we don't really know. But that's the MMAR, MMPR, and I admittedly get confused about all the initials myself. So I'm sure people here will. You have anything to add to that, Miss Ajia Moon?
I guess so. Most people had a hard time acquiring a license during the time that the MMR was open, and somehow I lucked out and I got it faster than anybody else. It was 24 hours after it was submitted that I received my MMAR.
That's got to be a record.
That's because my doctor called them constantly and harassed them until they produced it, which was quite interesting. But I also got a call once from Health Canada letting me know that I had not purchased enough marijuana during the year. And so my doctor contacted them back and let them know that's because she's been using the Nabalone as well. And so then I made one order for 500 grams of this crappy, ground up, seedy, stocky weed that came in a gold packet. And we ended up making what we called Harper butter out of it. It was pretty good.
Yeah, these companies that are growing medical cannabis in Canada, they're under very strict security protocols. They spend millions of dollars building these facilities to grow cannabis. Some of them got some pretty good buds. Some of them have absolute crap. There's been a few recalls because of the contaminants or whatever, but what I find odd is some of them sell their pot milled. So they grind it up and sell you a pre-ground cannabis. And if you know anything about cannabis, you know that not only are the trichomes exposed to oxygen begin to degrade, but all the terpenes and flavonoids and yumminess in that plant immediately begins to evaporate when you grind it all up. And they say, well, we do that for consistent potency, so it's all the same, but it makes no sense at all. When they first, the one company that does that especially, I think it's now force of habit, when they for a while, there was just one company allowed to grow medical marijuana in Canada. And they grew it deep in a mine shaft in northern Manitoba, far away from everybody where you couldn't get it, in this mine shaft. And they were told by Health Canada, there's too much THC in this stuff. We only wanted 7%, and your stuff's 10%, it's too strong. So they forced them to grind their cannabis and add stock to it to reduce the overall potency. They didn't want to do that. They were made to do this by Health Canada, just wrecking their cannabis. But that company no longer has to do that, but they still mill their weed and sell it to you in a prescription bottle all ground up. And even putting it in a prescription bottle, people are trying to get these buds, like when they sell you buds in a prescription bottle, it's got a tight neck. It's the wrong kind of jar. People are trying to get their buds out and they're tearing, the buds are all falling apart as they pull it out. It's like, why they can't give it to you in a nice, like open mouth mason jar or something? I don't understand. But anyway, so that's the challenge in Canada right now.
So you said something about 2 companies licensed to sell, but did I understand there's more?
No, there's 24 companies licensed to sell cannabis in Canada, roughly 24, and then there's about 300 more that have applied and haven't heard back, and several hundred that applied and got rejected. And I'm all for people being able to be licensed to grow cannabis. I think there should be hundreds and hundreds, and it should be a lot easier. There shouldn't just be 24 companies. How many microbreweries are there in Canada? I'm not sure, but I know there should be more microbreweries than there are microbreweries because cannabis is so much more easier to grow.
Are they required to have very high security, like security fences?
Yeah, they've got cameras and security, and everybody who touches those plants needs a permit, and they put more effort into security than they do into producing good medicine.
It's ironic that we lose 60 odd people a week to alcohol rate of death, and they do nothing about it.
You know, people ask me what the best arguments are to use to convince someone about legalization. And first of all, I say that most of my effort is not about convincing our opponents. It's about motivating those who already agree with us, because that's actually, I think, more important. But the winning arguments to make when it comes to legalization are not marijuana is good for you, marijuana will cure your cancer. Those things are true statements. They won't win people over. But saying marijuana is safer than alcohol is a very winning statement, because people don't want to believe that cannabis is good for you or that it's beneficial. But you go, well, people don't beat their wives after they, don't have domestic violence after they drink and smoke cannabis, like they do with alcohol. Well, that's true. And they don't, maybe it's not great to drive on cannabis, but it's way worse to drive on alcohol. Well, that's true. And so I think that is a much more successful argument than saying that cannabis is beneficial or anything, but to compare it with alcohol is a very positive one. I certainly know many people who used to use alcohol and who have reduced or stopped using alcohol because they use cannabis instead. And that is very valuable. They call cannabis a gateway drug, and I agree, but it's a gateway in the other direction. It's a gateway away from hard drugs, including alcohol, for many people into a more stable kind of lifestyle. And
Getting people off ice using medical cannabis, have you seen much use of that?
That's incredibly successful in Canada, especially in Vancouver. My store is located right in the downtown East Core, which is like probably the roughest neighborhood in all of Vancouver, and a lot of them are turning to medical marijuana to get over their heavy addictions to things like methamphetamines, cocaine, helping them with heroin use and stuff as well.
Is there anything on the net of an organisation that's doing that that you might start doing here?
Or specifically to help people with addictions by substituting cannabis? I know there was a study done in Canada the last year or two that came out that showed the substitution effect and showed that many people, like what we're saying, that many people can switch to cannabis and have a healthier outcomes and substituting cannabis for both prescription and illicit drugs. I know some of the dispensaries, especially in the downtown east side area, like she's saying, it's the cannabis poorest postal code in Vancouver. We have a supervised injection site there, and a lot of the hard drug users are herded into that part of town. And I know some dispensaries do free treatment. They provide free medication to people who have addiction issues or that kind of stuff. I'm not certain there's any specific organization that does that in Canada right now, but they probably should. Ironically, Vancouver City Council, Vision Vancouver, our governing party, which supports supervised injection sites, which supports harm reduction and legalization of marijuana, has forbidden dispensaries from operating in the downtown east side, where there's all these other drug users, saying they don't want us to prey on them. But I feel those people need access to cannabis, and many of them are poor, not highly mobile, not always welcome in other parts of the city because of the way they look and the way they behave, and that they're very difficult for them to go 6 blocks out to the other part of town to hit their dispensary. It's a lot harder for some other people to do that, but that's the kind of weird thing we have there. But there is definitely research showing that people who use alcohol and other drugs can help stabilize by using cannabis.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. When I did have my dispensary open, we offered counseling, not on a full-time basis, but on a part-time basis to those that were suffering from drug addictions, and provided them with free medication, marijuana, to help them, take the curb and get off those drugs.
Australian Aboriginals, actually some of their seeds in it do have a mild effect. So they've always been using it the whole life, and there was no effect. So it's not as heavy as cannabis, but there are seeds that do have a mild effect, and then they used to do initiation to give a higher dosage of it.
That's probably like a high CBD strain, if it's...
No, it's not cannabis. It's nothing to do with cannabis. This is natural food or seeds in Australia.
Okay.
This is long before they dumped cannabis here on the coast. This is for the last, since our people.
Probably most comparable to cocaine.
No.
Yeah, it was grown in Western Queensland. It was a bush that they cultivated. There was particular family groups that were allowed to cultivate
Stimulating plants.
And they composted it and so on. And then they cooked it up with the ash from another tree to maximise the alkaloid availability. And then they used to pack it up in little pressed packages which they could carry with them or put behind their ear. It would provide a low dose of constant stimulation, which was very helpful, like cocaine for long distance travelling and so on. And then when they met other people, they would chew it and then pass it around like a social drug. Very similar to the use of cut or cocaine in South America.
I'll say something about that.
Well, you know, to me, what we call the war on drugs is really a war on plants, and it's a war on the world's most culturally relevant, medically beneficial, and spiritually potent plants that are there, right? And so the coca leaf, the opium flower, opium poppy, peyote, cactus, or psilocybe mushrooms, and of course cannabis, all these plants, especially in their natural whole forms, are wonderfully useful and beneficial and of all kind of positive aspects. And obviously when made into very strong concentrates, there can be issues around that, but that's not normally how they were used for so long. And John mentioned when he introduced me that we used to actually sell coca leaf and coca plants at the Vancouver Seed Bank. I would bring them in from Bolivia and other parts of the world. They would mail them to us and we would sell them to people and they could grow their own coca leaf plants. It takes several years to get something out of it, and making cocaine out of it's virtually impossible, certainly not very cost effective. But I enjoy chewing coca leaf, and I still do. I find it more pleasant and better than coffee. But what I liked about that was when we were providing coca leaf to people out of the Vancouver Seed Bank in that downtown east side area, I had people come to us who would say, I'm a cocaine user and I have troubles with it and I feel I need it and I spend a lot of money on it. And when I chew the coca leaf I buy from you, I'm way more stable, I don't have to use so much cocaine, I save a bunch of money, I feel better, but I still get that thing that I need from that plant. And to me that is wonderful. And it's very good that we have in Vancouver a supervised injection site where you can go and get a clean needle to put your street drugs into. But I feel you should also be able to get some clean drugs from a doctor. And better yet, not only have pure cocaine be the only option, but have milder forms of these things being available. If the only alcohol we could drink was pure, strong alcohol, people would have more problems with that. If people prefer drinking beer and wine sometimes to stronger forms, and a lot of other drugs, the same kind of thing. If heroin users, some of them have had access to opium or opiates, they would stop using heroin. Maybe not all, but some would, and some cocaine users would be able to chew coca leaf and find that deals with the things that they need there too. And so that's, you know, kind of part of my thing is that it's not only, cannabis is the world's greatest plant. There's no question that no plant has the medicinal, industrial, nutritional value that cannabis does. But really at the root of all this drug war stuff, it's about plants and people's access to these plants. And usually it's plants that were used by native groups around the world that were seen as un-Christian, and they wanted to eliminate that part of their culture, and that's where the origin of a lot of the stuff comes from. I'll take John behind you and then you in the front.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about the role of Cannabis Culture magazine and Mark Emery, and you know, if May wants to sort of also speak about what she's planning to do with her magazine, Qualified Chicks. But yeah, particularly for you, Dana, I'd like to find out what you thought of how important a role cannabis culture played.
Well, in the early 90s, when I first, Mark Emery and I first started getting into activism, he had a newsletter called Marijuana and Hemp, and I took that over. We made it to Cannabis Canada magazine, and then a few years later, when we were selling most of our copies in the US, we changed it to Cannabis Culture magazine, and that really became the defining term that we've used, cannabis culture. And, the internet was just getting started in the mid-90s, and we had the Hemp BC page, was one of the first, the first 0.1% of websites out there anyways, and was a big thing. Yeah, one of the very first things, and we've still got some of those really old and basic web pages up there as part of that. But I think the magazine for us was very effective, and it was very effective for Mark Emery's seed business, because he didn't start off selling seeds, but that quickly, when he started selling seeds in Vancouver, that quickly became the most profitable and highly demanded part of his business. He was the only guy in the world willing to send cannabis seeds anywhere on the planet. The Dutch seed companies would have lots of seeds for sale. You had to go there to buy them. They weren't going to mail them to the States especially, or anywhere else in the world. And so, but Mark's seed catalog, we couldn't buy ads for it anywhere because High Times magazine wouldn't sell ads for our seed company. They were all scared, and mainstream magazines wouldn't even touch it. So the only place he could advertise was in his own magazine. And so cannabis culture really was symbiotic with that seed business in that it gave us a place for Mark to run his 15-page seed catalog every 2 months. We sold a lot of other ads, but without that seed thing in there, that magazine would have a hard time existing, especially in the early days where there was no other businesses. Now there's a lot of bong shops and dispensaries, and there's a vibrant cannabis marketplace that can advertise in those things. So the magazine, I think, was highly influential. So I was the editor of that for 10 years. And after I left, about 2 years later, they ended up folding it. That was in the mid-2000s when a lot of magazines were having troubles because the internet was destroying the magazine industry. And one of our biggest distributors went bankrupt, and that was about a quarter to a third of our copies went through that distributor. So we lost a huge chunk of our circulation, and Mark was like, I can't afford this anymore, so the magazine stopped, and now it's online only. Print is a challenging medium, especially, although I think it's coming back these days in that. I'll let her talk about her magazine, but I will say that the internet's been the biggest boost for the cannabis movement in so many ways, allowing to bypass censorship around the world. I know that Australia, they like to seize our books and magazines and we mail them to Australia. You have censorship laws here that need to be overturned. And the internet is very difficult to censor and very difficult to control. And it's the internet, I think, that has really liberated a lot of this information. But at the time, for the 10 years that I did cannabis culture with Mark, I think we really reached a lot of people, and it was quite influential in getting knowledge to people and giving businesses and that a place to advertise and promote and a place to reach an audience, and bringing that together, I think, was crucial. And I think the internet's now, taken over with that, so that we can all stay in touch with each other all around the world.
In regards to Canadian marijuana printing, there's another magazine called Skunk Magazine. It's quite interesting that Mark used his magazine as a medium for selling his seeds, because that's also what John Vergado's did. His magazine used to contain a catalog of his seeds as well that were able to be purchased in America, across Canada, and anywhere else in the world that was willing to try and get seeds from him. His magazine is still going, but he unfortunately received charges as a result of selling seeds, and he's awaiting trial now for that. But there's not a lot of Canadian magazines anymore in regards to marijuana, and I think it's because we went through a really hard time there where print just wasn't. I think it's because the internet came out and everyone was so excited, like, oh, why would I buy a book when I can just look it up on the internet? And I think now a bit of that hype has dulled down a little bit in Canada. People are more interested in print than they were before, but it's certainly not the way it was 10 years ago. Skunk Magazine's been in circulation now for 12 years, I believe. And when I started my magazine, it was in the midst of, like, this was dying. Print was not something people wanted. And I did find during my tours in Australia and in the States, print was wanted. And that's what encouraged me to print this magazine, was the fact that there are people that do want it, just not necessarily in Canada. I would say that maybe over 50% of my sales were to Australia, and then maybe 20-something% to Canada, and the rest went to America. The purpose of my magazine is certainly not to sell seeds. There is no advertisement whatsoever in my magazine at all. It is hopefully a medium for people to connect and to be able to push the movement even further than it's already gone.
Oh, it just seems astonishing that 50% of your sales is Australia. How do you arrange that?
Oh, during my tour of Australia the year before, I've come to Australia very often. I've been coming here since I was 10. First time I arrived in Australia, I was on full body crutches, could barely move around, and the first time I really got to use my legs after that operation was here. I did a tour with my mom. We went through here, we went to the Solomon Islands, we went to Indonesia, we went all over the place. I actually spent a year in the Solomon Islands going to private school. And I don't know, that's what my fascination with Australia is the first time I got to really walk was here. I got to be a real human being here, and it's, I don't know, when I did my tour, I talked about this magazine. Like, if I made a magazine, would you guys want to buy it? Oh yeah, and I pre-sold half the magazines that came to Australia before it was even printed. All they had was a promise, and they sent me money. And then eventually I was like, okay, magazine's ready, I'm sending out your copies, and I'll see you guys in a couple months.
So what the method of distribution isn't through news agencies and bookshops?
No, it's all done independently.
It's sort of subscription.
I haven't actually issued subscriptions, but I mean, when I first did this, I wasn't really, there's one issue so far. So volume 2 will happen when I get home, but it won't be on the shelves until next year.
So, is it Mark Emery that is facing the charges, is it, or somebody else?
He's already faced his charges, been convicted and returned home. My friend John Vergatos, who's the owner of Skunk Magazine, is currently facing charges for trafficking marijuana seeds.
And so is Mark in prison?
No, he's returned home now, which was a long prison sentence. It was 4.5 years.
Mark did 4.5 years in an American prison for selling marijuana seeds to Americans. He actually went to jail quite a few times in Canada for ridiculous stuff, for trafficking in bongs. He's got a record for promoting vaporizers in Canada. He spent 3 months in jail in Saskatoon, which is, I don't know, the Alabama of Canada, I guess, there for passing a joint. They convicted him of trafficking in cannabis, but his biggest thing was, yeah, he was sending seeds all around the world. That's against the law in Canada. They could have charged him in Canada with exporting cannabis seeds, but under Canadian law, he would have got a few weeks in jail and a fine. But instead, Canada didn't refuse to charge him, and then the American government charged him under American law, where he was facing a 30-year mandatory minimum sentence, him and 2 of his employees. And they fought it for many years in the Canadian courts, but all the lawyers were like, you're never going to win this case. People from Canada don't win extradition cases to the US. So he ended up doing a deal in the end and getting a 5-year sentence, which helped get his 2 employees off, and they got parole and didn't do any time. And they put him in Yazoo, Mississippi, which is about as far away from Canada as you can get. I probably spent $10,000 spending Mark books while he was in jail for him to read and share, and he ended up joining the prison band, learning how to play bass guitar and jamming out with some pretty talented musicians a few times while he was there. But yeah, Mark's been back for over 2 years now, 1.5 years now or something like that or whatever, and he's been working at Cannabis Culture, and he's actually was just in Thailand for their first ever April 20th 420 celebration in Thailand. He was supposed to speak there. They had a rally there, not a big smoke-in, pot-dealing rally like we have in Vancouver, but a probably pretty nervous gathering in Thailand. A bunch of the Thai DEA showed up and said, you can have your rally, keep doing what you're doing, but Mark Emery is not allowed to speak. If you let him speak, we're going to start arresting people. And so Mark wasn't allowed to talk, but otherwise the event happened, but they thought his words would be too dangerous. But yeah, Mark did his time in the US, and really, I mean, without Mark, I think the seed, or the dispenser, or the head shop revolution, the selling bongs and pipes, and the seed bank revolution, those things really, Mark really started, that kind of civil disobedience. And you know, the girl that opened the first dispensary in Vancouver had been the manager of Mark's store. I worked for Mark on his magazine, and a lot of other people in the pot scene kind of started in that little circle of activists that Mark got going in the 90s. And but yeah, that's where we're at right now. Well, yeah, he did his time, and he stood up, and I think that idea of civil disobedience and standing up, I know that inspired me and many others to do the same kind of thing, and to take those risks and to find the weak spots in the system and make change happen.
It's actually funny you should say that most people started out with Cannabis Culture, Mark Emery. When I first moved to Vancouver, that was my first job, was working for Mark Emery in Cannabis Culture. And then I kind of felt the pressures of being in Alex were too much, and then I left for Australia for 3 months, and then Dana hired me, so, yeah.
All right, you got a question there?
Yeah, I was just interested in like the civil disobedience and the business side of it. What are some of the techniques you've used to sort of gain like local community support, or try and convince city councils that it's a good idea? Have you been able to be like open and transparent in the process of setting it up, or is it sort of
you know, we've used both models, and it's hard to say which one is better, you know? I mean, I think if you can get your mayor on board, that's very positive. And if your mayor hates you and your neighbors don't like you, you're going to have a very hard time, right? Your landlord's got to be on board, and your immediate neighbors have to be on board, or you're not going to have a successful business. Mayors can be convinced and can be turned sometimes, but mayor and city council is also important too, because they control things like business licenses, and they have an influence. Maybe here it's a bit different, but they don't control the police in Canada, but they have a big influence over them. And in every city in Canada where someone's tried to open a medical marijuana dispensary and the local mayor and council have said, we support that, they have not been raided. In every city where the mayor and council said, it's a federal law, we don't control it, or worse yet, we don't want that in our town, usually the cops go after it. And so there's no legal power for the mayor to say, don't enforce the law against that guy. But in practical terms, it's very influential when that happens. And because they're closer, especially in a smaller town, in fact, the pieces in Canada that have been the most progressive have been some of the smallest towns, because it's a small community. If people support that, the mayor is just going to respond to what people say, and you can meet them in person. There's less sort of intermediaries involved in that, right? But depending on what kind of business you do, I think trying to get the mayor on board is important. It's not always, essential, but it certainly helps a lot. And I know in Canada, we've had some areas where dispensaries have been opened and where the mayor has been trash talking them, or the RCMP have come in and raided, but they've tried to reopen, and we've organized. I've got a big list of phone numbers in BC from our Central BC campaign, so I can do a call out to a town with a recorded message from me saying, call push 1 to talk to the mayor right now, and I can get like 100 phone calls into a mayor somewhere, right? And so when that happens, especially in a smaller town, they're not normally getting 100 phone calls in any topic, so we've changed their minds, or I've had mayors in some cities start off kind of against dispensaries, and after a 2-week phoning campaign, they're like, well, actually, people are telling me we want these things in our community, and I've just changed my mind in that, and so it can be very effective. I wouldn't start with trying to open a dispensary in Australia right now, and it took us 25 years to get from bong shops being raided to dispensaries everywhere, right? So it's a long process, and it may or may not take that long. It might take longer, it might be easier here, I don't know, but there was a lot of people who went to jail, a lot of things had to go through that process to kind of get to where we are now, right? But I think that, bong shops and head shops, perhaps making cannabis seeds available, are things that could probably be risky, but probably can be. I know there is bong shops and head shop stuff here, and I know that sometimes they get harassed. Selling seeds is something that I think, I don't know exactly what the laws are or how it stands. Usually seeds are in a weird kind of gray area because they weren't thinking about that when they wrote the laws, right? But I said finding the weak spots, or the creams I was talking about, or salves, or CBD products, or information, or whatever it is that you can create that. But ideally, a store also acts as kind of a focus point for activists. People who are interested in that will start hanging out there, trying to get jobs there, wanting to do things. And when you're making a living doing stuff, then it's easier to volunteer more of your time for that cause. When you're kind of there already, it becomes your kind of lifestyle. And you also get, when it's your life, your income depends on something, you're more motivated to want to work at it and make a change at it, right? So all those things can be very influential. I'm not sure I even answered your question specifically, but does that kind of give you some...
Interested in finding aspects of it.
I would definitely say look for the loopholes and the places where you can kind of get away with things. Back in the day, I realized your seed bank was not supposed to be open, and you guys formed a political party, the Seeds political party, to stay open. So that was your loophole, but at one point the city was like, we're not giving you a license. I'm like, oh, that's okay, I'll just open up a political party or get a nonprofit society and we'll open that way. And then a couple weeks later they gave us a call back and said, okay, we'll talk about a business license. So there's always a way to try and work around it, that's for sure.
Yeah, what she's referring to, when I opened the Vancouver Seed Bank in 2005 with my partner then, a woman named Rebecca, and the city said, well, you're going to be selling marijuana seeds and that's illegal, we're not going to give you a business license. So we read through the city bylaws, and we saw that, oh, there she is, yes. And we saw that if you're a political party, you don't need a business license to operate a storefront. And the idea for that was that during an election campaign, political parties open storefronts and don't need to, but it wasn't phrased like that. So we created, and luckily in British Columbia, it's very easy to form a political party. Some provinces, you need thousands of signatures and all this stuff. In BC, you can do it for about $100 and 3 or 4 signatures. So Rebecca and I created the Planting Seeds Party, a registered political party in British Columbia, and we incorporated the Vancouver Seed Bank as being part of the Planting Seeds Party, and the city officials who have been coming in saying, we're going to start fining you every day if you don't close in the next 24 hours, they stopped showing up. And now, 10 years went by before we had any more problems from the city at that location. And so having a lawyer or having somebody that can help you find maybe weaknesses in the system or ways of getting around stuff can be very useful, in that regard. But trying to find the loopholes where you can get into things. In Canada, for instance, bongs and pipes are banned, but the law says that it says paraphernalia for illicit drug use is forbidden, but not medical devices. And so now in Canada, when they wrote that law, no one thought of a bong or a vaporizer as a medical device because medical marijuana wasn't a thing yet. But now we know they are, and so we can make those kind of arguments, say, well, this isn't a bong, it's a medical device for cannabis users who want to filter the smoke. So that kind of thing, right? So I would encourage, try to find those spots, or at least where if you are breaking the law, the penalties, the judge is unwilling to put you in jail for a long time, where the judge is going to go, you're charging this guy, if you're bringing me a guy who's selling cream to people for their arthritis with 0.01% THC in it, why are you doing this? I'm going to give him a community service and a $500 fine next, right? And they go, well, that was a waste of time, and hopefully you go back and keep selling your cream. And other people go, he only got a $500 fine? I'm going to do that too. That's all the risk there is, and then once you start doing some, others will begin to join in, right? So I don't know which of these avenues is the right one, but those are the kind of things that we've done in Canada: seed banks, bong shops, medical marijuana, creams and salves and other ways of civil disobedience. I'm going to take, not you, right, because I think if other people had questions first, or who hadn't asked anything yet? Did anybody who hasn't asked a question yet got one ready? No? Okay, then go ahead and then you put your hand up over there right here next.
Okay, is there anything you can take to mask THC in the body? Now, I'm not talking about smoking, you drop or smoke.
Like to pass the swab test and stuff? You know, I don't know. I mean, in Canada, we don't have that kind of swab test stuff, and I feel that if they did introduce that, we'd go to court and we'd get it deemed unconstitutional. Because if they can't show a direct scientific correlation or proof that this level of cannabinoids in your bloodstream equals this amount of impairment, which I don't believe they can do, then in Canada anyways, under our system, we would go to court, we'd get that overturned. But they do blood tests and pee tests and stuff on people, and certainly at employment, that kind of thing. We sell, or not we, but many stores sell like things you can drink that will help flush your body of stuff for a urine test. But
this can be problematic if they leave traces of something else in your urine, and if the person who's testing you knows what they're doing, they'll test you for that as well, and then they're going to ask you to retest because they found there's traces of the elixir you take.
But, and I know, and then people were selling drops made out of different things. I'm not sure if those are going to work or not, or even how accurate these tests even are. May got tested and probably shouldn't have passed that test.
Well, that test was broken, for sure. I just spoke to Joy, and he was like, here's your license and stuff back, have a good day. I'm like, oh, what? Oh, go.
Get this tired, squealing room. But yeah, so I'm not sure of anything that would mask those, that would mask it on the tongue test, if there's anything like that or not. But if there is, I would start selling those if you could find something that actually worked. But I'm not sure how that whole system works and if anything does to that. All right.
You first mentioned you're members of the NDP, is that correct?
Yeah, that stands for the New Democratic Party. And it's not really new anymore because it was started in the 1930s, and you could debate how democratic they are, but it's definitely a party.
So were you involved in the policy change that led to their change in policy? And if so, what kind of resistance did you meet?
Well, that's a long story, actually. I helped found the Marijuana Party in Canada, and in 2003, the then leader of the NDP, a guy named Jack Layton, came on Pot TV in Mark Emery's living room and said, our party's policy is decriminalization, but I actually support going even further than that. And he looked in the camera and said, I encourage you, if you're watching this, to join our party and help us form better marijuana policies and help us figure out what the policy should be. And I went, sounds good to me. And I joined the NDP. And my experience with the NDP has been very frustrating, very challenging, and they probably feel the same way about me. I tried to run well, first of all, I went to the NDP. Most parties in Canada, there's federal and they're provincial, and they're totally separate. So the BC Liberal Party is not at all affiliated with Canada's Liberal Party. Maybe some crossover in members, but they're two different groups with different policies. Often they fight with each other, and they're very different, right? But the NDP, being a socialist kind of people's movement party, is one big unified thing all across the country. So when I go to the NDP convention in Ontario, I'm still a brother to them, and they call each other brother and sister in that kind of union-y kind of way still, right? So I'm still part of that thing. So I traveled across the country introducing and helping locals to introduce marijuana and drug policies. And we passed all this great stuff, and pretty much every time we passed something, it would get dissed or ignored or attacked by the party elite. So in Saskatchewan, which is one of the big prairie provinces in Canada, and we had a convention there, and this was, 10 years ago now or something. We passed a beautiful policy on legalization of marijuana. The policy recognized the federal issue, but that the provincial party would do what it could to promote this idea and to lobby the federal government, blah, blah, blah. Passed virtually unanimously at the convention. And the next day, the Saskatchewan Justice Minister says, we don't support that. Like the NDP member said, we don't support it. Why would they pass that at our convention? It's not even a provincial issue. What a bunch of idiots. And totally dismissed this whole thing. Well, I had with me all these guys who had worked very hard to create the Saskatchewan Marijuana Party, which is not as easy as it is in BC. It's very difficult. And these guys had worked so hard, and they were all ready to join the NDP and bring all this youthful vigor and excitement into the NDP. When they passed that, they were all there as observers, and they were so excited. Then when the Justice Minister just crushed our dreams the next day, they were all like, well, we're not going to join. And I had this experience over and over again across the country. And federally, we tried to bring in policies to support legalization, and they would not get to the floor. They were happy with their decriminalization stance, because decriminalization can kind of mean whatever you want, right? To a cop, decriminalization can mean you get a big fine for possession, or we crack down on the growers. To someone else, decriminalization might mean they just take the laws off the books, you can do whatever you want, like tomatoes are decriminalized or whatever, and so they could tailor their message to different groups, right? But Jack Layton and I kind of had a challenge. In 2008, I got the nomination to run federally as an NDP candidate in my riding. I'd sought it 3 times locally. Each time I'd come in second to someone else who'd won the nomination, and I'd helped them. 3rd time I got lucky and got the nomination. And it was a disaster, me trying to run for the NDP. Because this was in 2008, and I had made a lot of videos for Pot TV. I'm very outspoken, not only about cannabis, but other things as well. And my local people all knew who I was, and that I'm a rational, intelligent guy and would make a fine representative. But a few weeks into the campaign, the Liberal Party of Canada, which now promises to legalize marijuana, edited together clips from my Pot TV shows where I'd smoked cannabis, where I'd dropped acid on camera and walked around my town talking about things. And I think I was very responsible in all of my videos. There's one where I was about to get in my car at the end of the video. I said, I got one rolled for the road. And of course, they include that in there. But they basically take all my crazy stuff and put it into like a 15-second video, which played on the news over and over again. And they also, I talked about selling coca plants. Well, they also called the paper, said Dana was selling cocaine at the Vancouver Seed Bank several years ago. And yeah, and so my campaign, the NDP, they were already nervous about me. It's a much longer story. I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but I had to resign. I didn't want to resign, but I had to resign my candidacy in 2008. I wasn't the only one. A few others had to resign for other reasons, but it's always a good coup when one party can knock out another guy's candidate, right? And then it takes them off message for a couple of days. And there was a funny cartoon in Canada's national newspaper of me with a joint in my mouth, wearing a t-shirt with a big pot leaf on it, and Jack Layton there going, "You smoke pot?" And like, this is the ridiculousness of this whole thing, right? But that really caused a lot of problems. The next year I was banned from the NDP convention, ostensibly for other reasons, but really for that, and created a huge kerfuffle in the party. And then in 2011, in British Columbia, the leader of our provincial NDP resigned, and I announced I was going to run for the leadership of the BC NDP. And some of them freaked out because they thought I was going to be out there, vote Dana, man, like legalize it, whatever, and be like a crazy person making them all look bad, right? But I actually ran a very dignified campaign, and I talked about cannabis, but I was trying to, so I ended up winning them over. And by the end of, I didn't win obviously, but by the end of the campaign, several months had gone by. I had bonded with all the other MPs that had run, and we all kind of knew each other, and I think rehabilitated myself within the party. But we were still very frustrated that, the NDP policy, we pushed for legalization after Jack Layton. Jack Layton was very popular, took the NDP from 3rd place into official opposition for the first time against the Conservatives. The Liberals dropped to 3rd place, which is unprecedented in our country's history. The Liberals are often seen as Canada's natural governing party, whatever that means, right? But they've been in power a long time. So in this last election, we had a leader named Thomas Mulcair, who was all over the map on marijuana, right? First, when he was running for the leadership, he was like, I do not support decriminalization, which is party policy. And then later he was, it causes mental illness, and then, I do support decriminalization, but then he was all over it. And Trudeau and the Liberals passed a policy for legalization. And Trudeau at first didn't even support his own party's policy, but then eventually he came around to it. And for the election, marijuana legalization was probably one of the few policies anybody could name from the Liberals. And they came back from 3rd place to a big majority. The NDP dropped from 2nd place back to 3rd place, crushing our hopes of forming government for the first time ever federally. The NDP has governed in many provinces but never held federal government. And we think I think it's because of marijuana. I'm convinced that if Mulcair had said I support legalization, the Liberals would have had nowhere to go. But that's my experience anyways. But that sounds kind of frustrating in a lot of ways, but at the same time, I'm still convinced that our work was influential and that our work in the NDP helped allow the Liberals to adopt a legalization policy, and that kind of helped make those changes happen.
I think your question specifically was about the people that pushed the policy forward and voted it in?
Yeah, and the resistance you received from within the party.
Well, there was definitely resistance, but there were so many people voting in favor that, the resistance can only go so far. If there's more numbers than there are people resisting, that's it. It's kind of game over for them. We overthrew the table during that convention. It was pretty powerful.
In 2011 in Vancouver, there was a convention, and we had a marijuana policy, and there was also like a harm reduction we support the supervised injection site policy because there's one in Vancouver, it was the only one in Canada, and the Conservatives were trying to shut it down. It was actually a Supreme Court case where they fought to keep it open and they won. And so our marijuana policy didn't get forward, but the one on harm reduction and injection site did. And we amended part of our other policy about marijuana into the supervised injection site one. And I've been to like over a dozen of these conventions. It was the first time where I saw from the floor of the convention, we overruled the chair. They did all this stuff. Yeah, the orgies. That's later on, right? We're going to have the orgy. And it was the first time I'd ever seen the grassroots of the party totally go against what the party elite wanted. We overruled the chair in this big vote, big thing to get this policy passed. And it was wonderful to see. But how much influence it had on the federal party's political, their campaign promises and all that? I don't know, not that much probably.
I think though if you continue to charge through with big numbers and you outnumber the people that don't like those kind of policies, eventually your word will have to be heard. After so many years of constantly pushing it forward, something has to buckle and give at some point.
Yeah, just the last point on that I'll make, and then I'll take yours, is that political parties are the ones that give us the choices we choose from. And if we don't get into the political party, that's only a tiny percentage of the population that actually belongs to political parties usually. And that's, I think, your voice would be much more effective. Joining a political party. I know you've got like the hemp party, and I met the sex party MP who's elected in Nimbin, and that was good. And I've worked with like the fringe marijuana party or whatever. And here you got a bit better chance of those parties actually getting into power. But I do feel like if everyone who voted for the hemp party or the sex party all went and joined one of the mainstream parties and showed up at meetings and voted for policies that they want to see, it'd probably be more influential in the long run than sticking in a smaller party where they all agree with each other. But it's a lot harder to do that because people will disagree with you, and you've got to be more organized and more set up, and it's not as fun. It's more fun being in the hemp party or being in the sex party. They have a much better time, I'm sure, right, than in the Liberal Democrats. So I don't even know what the parties that you have here, I'm sorry. But that idea, I think that getting within a mainstream party, if you've got the numbers, you can have a bigger influence in the long run than staying in your own smaller party where you're all in agreement with each other.
Definitely your vote, as many votes as you can get that like-minded people are going to make change. No suit, no amount of money can change your vote. And it's super important that you find a party that works kind of with your own belief system, and you go in there and you infiltrate it with, your good ideas and hopefully make change in your party, which should make change in your country. If everyone joined the political party they liked most and made change there, eventually the country would have to do something because every party would be on board for marijuana.
Can you give us an introduction about Canada's, is it a Charter of Rights or is it a Bill of Rights? And then how does that assist when people took matters forward?
Yeah, well, we used to have a Bill of Rights, but just Pierre Trudeau, when we got our Constitution in Canada, introduced a Charter of Rights. And it's basically the supreme law of the land, and it has lots of open-ended statements about, I don't even know if I can quote the Charter of Rights to people, but probably should be able to, and I can't.
In our conception, the Charter of Rights is, the Queensland Parliament is supreme, like the Parliament of England, and it can make any rule, including change to the Constitution. The Charter would be something that the politicians would pass an act, and then they'd have to have a statement that it conflicts with that, but nonetheless push it through, where a Bill of Rights, the Supreme Court could strike down laws. Is it in the nature of something that they can just override, that they acknowledge they override, or is it something that the highest judge can say that it conflicts?
Well, actually, it's both. They are allowed to override it. We call it the notwithstanding clause in Canada. So if any province or the federal government wants to pass an unconstitutional law, they can do so by putting the notwithstanding clause and saying we're doing it despite it violates the Charter of Rights. But luckily in Canada, that's politically toxic and politically suicide to do that. The only thing I think I know that does that are Quebec's language laws. Because Quebec has laws about that you can't have English signs that are bigger than French signs and all these protection laws about their language. And those are unconstitutional, but they passed that, and Quebec's also, it's political suicide to mess with Quebec's language laws in Canada also, right? But otherwise, the courts have multiple times overruled Canadian laws, saying they're unconstitutional because of this Charter of Rights. And no government has ever said, we're just going to do it anyways. They could, and if they start, once they do it once, probably it'll be easier to do it a bunch of times, but so far no government, other than the Quebec language law, has ever used the notwithstanding clause ever in our history.
Queensland's like Canada and having a unicameral parliament, but Canada obviously has to full back as a quasi upper house or quasi break on the.
We have two houses. We have a Senate in Canada as well, but it's appointed by the Prime Minister, and they get a job kind of for life, but when they die, the new Prime Minister can appoint new ones. So it's sort of like the House of Lords in that it's not elected, but it's also not hereditary. And we've had all these scandals with our Senate because there's no rules, they can do whatever they want, but they typically don't. Typically Parliament gets what it wants. The Senate, very, very rarely does the Senate ever really try to fight with Parliament because they're not elected, they don't really have any moral authority. Sorry, but go ahead.
Yeah, I guess, Queensland had some, corruption issues in the 80s, however, eventually we've got quite prostitution laws where you can, get a legal brothel and comply with all their rules and, they're in the newspaper every day, that type of thing. But, something like cannabis, which kind of was considered in a similar inquiry, that nothing's ever moved forward in this state, and, to a degree, Queensland is known as the deep north of the very conservative state. How would you suggest when we have a unicameral parliament, we don't have an upper house, there's many structural problems to get changed in this state compared to more liberal states in the south of Australia?
Well, it's a challenging question to answer, but
I'm just going to the task that's fucking around for donations for the meeting, that's all.
Alright, donations for the meeting.
If you want to dodge those questions about Australia,
I will not dodge it. I will do my best to answer. I mean, I would say that politically, it's a challenge when none of the parties are very supportive, and when if you said you've got a Charter of Rights here, but do they commonly?
Not in Queensland.
Not in Queensland. You've got a federal.
In Victoria, they have a charter that rule, but they've got a similar clause.
So there's no charter. There's no sort of overarching statements of principle that all laws must acknowledge this or that kind of thing. Is there in Canada and England, a lot of that's unwritten kind of stuff where it's there, but it's not formally, it's more tradition and precedent and that kind of stuff, right? So, I would say that you probably want to talk to a lawyer or somebody who's got a better understanding of that, but if you can either get a political party that's going to get on board or get into them to try to help make that change.
Here, if it's, very difficult, would you suggest either, hemp fibre, obviously make that the cream suggestion, paraphernalia is banned in this state, because now you can't buy a bong, you have to buy a vase, water up, all this kind of, BS words to say it without saying it.
You've got to be willing, or what I tell people is consider the worst case scenario. If you're going to do civil disobedience, look at what the worst case scenario could be. And if you can deal with that situation, then go for it. But if you can't, if the penalties are too severe or the risks are too much for you to handle, then don't go that path because you're not going to be able to continue it, right? So it really depends on what the situation is. But I know that, my experience in Canada anyways, that the penalties are quite severe. Selling a bong in Canada is a $100,000 fine and 6 months in prison. That's the maximum penalty for the first offense, but the courts were very unwilling to give anybody those kind of penalties. I don't know if that's the case here or not. If you open a bong shop and they put you in jail for 3 years, maybe opening bong shops isn't the best idea necessarily, right? So you've got to find those things and those areas where you can make a change. But I will certainly say that in Canada, all of our change, the laws are worse now than they've ever been in Canada. Really, we're supposed to be changing them soon, but right now, we've got very strict laws. All of our successes come either in the courts by forcing the government to do stuff, or through civil disobedience, just changing how things are enforced on the ground, right? And I know, in Nimbin, for instance, they asked one of the police officers, well, are you turning a blind eye to all the marijuana? And he said, we're not turning a blind eye, it's a rising tide. They start arresting people, they're going to be overwhelmed, they just can't do anything, right, when you've got those kind of numbers. So I'm not sure of a specific answer for you, but I would say try to find the areas or find the avenues where you can have the most impact and the most media coverage for the least amount of risk that you're willing to handle, right? But civil disobedience certainly isn't the only technique, but it's still, I think, one of the most effective.
Just just clarify, there is a very strong movement to have a charter of rights in Queensland along the Victorian model. It's It's being put into the parliamentary process. There is a process happening right now.
And that's what joining politics can help achieve, right? Get things like the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to be able to, you know, have the things that you need come forward.
Yeah, well, just to clarify that.
That's
because
great.
The government is actually quite sympathetic to getting that through, and it's the most positive that we've had for a very long time on that issue. So,
You know,
Victoria is the only other state in Australia that has that model, and it's not in the Constitution, it's just passed by the legislature.
And you know, you talk about things like a dispensary or whatever. Well, I mean, you can just, if you want to help people, you can say, I'm going to open a dispensary
For kids who've got epilepsy, and we're only going to provide them with certain kinds of things. You can be very restrictive, right? So if they're going to arrest you, they're arresting you for helping some 6-year-old kid with epilepsy or whatever. And I think hopefully, you know, judges and the public opinion will support you on that, right? So you can find even very narrow venues. Because I know that the kids with epilepsy is becoming a thing here, and that's been so powerful. And so many in the States see these politicians who are so against pot and so against drugs, but, oh, medical marijuana, well, that's a little different. You put the word medical in front of it, suddenly it's a whole different thing, right? It's been medical for a kid who's not even getting high, like it becomes very difficult to oppose that, right? So our dispensary will help people with all kinds of ailments and all kinds of things, but you know, you don't have to start a storefront and start selling marijuana to everybody who has trouble sleeping or whatever, right? You can be very restrictive in how you supply or find. You know, you can always expand things later, right? But that kind of things can be very effective because the cops are not going to want to bust somebody who's helping provide medicine to children who need it in a strict kind of way. And hopefully, said the courts will not be willing to kind of punish you severely for that. So I think maybe those kind of venues, finding the narrowest possible avenue where you can have an impact is what I would recommend.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment on that. And I think that the comment I'd like to make is that we really haven't got any organisation working for drug law reform, particularly cannabis law reform in Queensland, and that's been a problem. You went back 25 years when we had hemp as a social movement. Hemp would be organising all the time, we'd be having rallies all the time. But since it's become a political party, it's controlled from Lyndon, and there's no way that you can affect it from Queensland. For example, they didn't even send out something about this meeting, which I'd asked them to. Didn't go out, apparently, because Michael and he a few. I don't know what the reason is, but there isn't. The problem is that you've got a political party which is only active when elections come up, which doesn't sort of keep going all the time. And what you need is a social movement, and you do need institutions such as the dispensaries and things like that are social movements. They sort of bring people together, and that's what we really need to do in Brisbane, at least to do there, is to set about doing that. I think the sort of joining the hemp party is real fraud. I mean, the people in the hemp party are very good friends of mine, and I like them sincerely, but what they're doing to Queensland is dreadful. There's sort of there's no control over the hemp party in Queensland from anyone in Queensland. You can't really get them to send out, even sort of invitations to meetings like this. I think that that's the main problem. Is that we've got a sort of very much a fake movement in the hemp party, and we need to sort of set up some sort of group which is a social movement rather than a political party, which can sort of be in all sorts of different parties.
I definitely think joining together, reaching out to each other will help a lot in that. You guys seem to be a little bit further behind than we are in Canada. You haven't quite got to the point where you've joined a whole bunch or created a whole bunch of independent groups where you can talk about marijuana and medical marijuana. I think also when you talk about civil disobedience and people are scared, if you look at how it takes to protect yourself, your family, you'll feel a lot more confident after. If you guys get together, more people will get involved because they'll see that you guys are doing it, and then their friends will come and their friends' friends will come. And that's kind of how Canada got as far as it did, is everybody just stopped being scared and joined together.
Anyway, the South East Queensland Hemp Embassy Facebook page is a good page to like and join, and I'd like to see it become that sort of
non-political parties would work with cannabis in certain circumstances. Sorry, Dan.
I was going to say that change costs money. And like, there was a guy at the Niman thing who was writing to me, oh, you're charging people for your books, you should give your books away, and it's all about money. And like, money makes change. Money is so important for our movement to have funding. And if you can find a way to make money as an activist, it's very powerful. Because not only does it give you the freedom to put more time into what you're doing, but you can direct money into the things that don't make any money, but that need to happen. You know, I've spent probably hundreds of thousands of dollars of money that I've earned from my dispensary and seed bank and whatnot over the years. And Mark put in like $5 million, I think, to the movement in a 6 or 7 year period from his seed sales. And not everyone's going to be able to generate that kind of revenue necessarily, but it sounds weird, but if you can make money as an activist doing what you're doing, you can employ other people and give them the opportunity to make a living being an activist or doing change. It's incredibly powerful and incredibly useful kind of a thing to have. And I you know, it's not always possible, and there's plenty of ways of being an activist without making a profit at it, certainly, but it's a key thing that I encourage people to try to find a way to combine business and activism and social change together into one thing. Because without money to do stuff, or putting on rallies or organizing events or all this kind of stuff, traveling, it all takes cash, and it needs that kind of revenue to be there. And yeah, so anyways, that's that.
Yes, yeah, obviously, considering that you two probably have more clinical experience with cannabis in the entire state of the country, and we accept epilepsy, the harder cases like brain tumours and MS, just from feedback from the people who have come through your dispensary, can you give us some sort of expectation on what to offer people when they turn to cannabis? Are a lot of people getting better with MS, or they're just not progressing, or what sort of outcomes are you seeing?
Yeah, MS is something you don't necessarily get better from, but certainly cannabis stops the progression of the disease as well as dealing with the symptoms. And you know, when someone comes in, we usually don't recommend smoking as the first alternative, right? Smoking cannabis is good when you need a fast reaction of something that's coming on quickly, or you know, you want to be able to titrate your dose very regularly. And the problem with edibles a lot of the time is the potency is not consistent. So what gets you a nice medicinal effect one time might do nothing the next time, or might get you too high or whatever, right? So we try to offer, you know, we do offer a lot of smokable products, and raw buds are our #1 top sellers, but a lot of drops and tinctures and things like that are also very popular for people. And also socially, not everyone wants to smell like pot, and smoking pot is, you can't do it in your workplace, you often can't do it in your home or in your apartment, you certainly can't do it in your car, you can't do it in public, but a few drops under your tongue or drops into your tea or whatever is very possible for people to do in a very discreet kind of way and still get their medicinal value. And one of the products that we sell, that we actually make at our dispensary, it's a hemp seed oil, so it's hemp seeds, no psychoactivity there, but hemp seed oil does have a lot of nutritional and health benefits, and we infuse that with cannabis resin. So people make it different ways. They either use bubble hash, or they use hash oil or whatever, but they extract that into the cannabis oil, hemp seed oil, and you take it as drops under your tongue. You can also apply it topically to your skin. That's actually the base that we use to make those creams I was talking about. We mix that oil into a pharmaceutical cream and create a topical product for that. But often those kind of things are more effective. And we also used to sell a lot of edible products, cookies and brownies and all that. And the city of Vancouver, in their infinite wisdom, has banned edible products from all the dispensaries. Well, we had a court case in the federal government that said patients have the right to extracts and edibles. The city of Vancouver's banned edible products from dispensaries, but does allow us to sell capsules and tinctures and drops and those kind of things. And while I think food products should be allowed, it's kind of a hard argument to make that I demand my medicine in the form of a cookie because a capsule is not good enough for me. It's a hard argument to make, right? I mean, I certainly support access in those forms. I would rather see a rule around child-proof packaging and proper labeling on edibles than a complete ban, right? But certainly non-smokable forms are very popular, and usually what I recommend. And for people with systemic ailments like MS or cancer or something that's that kind of thing, usually ingesting it orally is very effective. Something else that's becoming very popular in North America now is suppositories. And it's actually a very good way to get high amounts of cannabis into your system, because when you eat it, it goes through your liver, and it actually becomes more psychoactive and stronger and having a more mental effect. But when you take drops under your tongue and you absorb them into your blood that way, Whereas suppository, it bypasses your liver and goes right into your bloodstream, and you can get a much higher level of cannabis into your body. And it's also just kind of a thing, like if they're going to bust you for selling cannabis suppositories, it makes people laugh in many ways, and it's seen like people aren't doing this recreationally, clearly, you know. And so that, and there's also vaginal suppositories for women, for menstrual cramps, and for other conditions as well. For a lot of men have prostate problems, and delivering it, you know, suppository can really target that medicine to where it needs to go. But those kind of things are becoming more popular anyways too at our dispensaries and at other ones.
Hidden fuse seed oil with beeswax.
Yeah, well, not as a suppository. We don't do our suppositories like that, but you can. Yeah, there are some people that are doing beeswax. Coconut oil is usually, because coconut oil is solid at room temperature, but melts very quickly, and so you can just kind of stuff it up there, and it'll melt inside your body very quickly. But there's all different kinds of things. Some of them are capsules that dissolve or whatever. There are different ones out there, but that's actually becoming quite a popular method. It's just hard keeping the joint lit. That's all. That's the little joke. It is a bit, it's a bit, yeah, I think it makes it a bit less likely to want to charge you because it's just a bit weird and people laugh about it and stuff. But I mean, it's very good access to medicine, absolutely. It's very important and something. But smoking is usually best for immediate, really, you got pain right now. You want to get rid of it. You eat a capsule and it's going to come on an hour later, right? But you smoke and you immediately get that hit. And if you've got nausea, eating is not very good for nausea because you're going to puke it back up before it has an effect, right? And so once again, smoking can be the way, or even to help smoking. But if you want a systemic amount, a high level of cannabis in your bloodstream, especially for things like cancer, where you should be having very large doses, up to 1 gram of pure cannabinoids, you know, or more every day, which is a lot of medicine. Yeah, you take that orally or in all different forms. And I'd recommend probably multiple, you know, entrances into your body to get that stuff. But anyways, yeah, those are some of the options. And I think when you're not, I mean, so smoking can be good medicine, but I think in terms of public perception, those who don't understand cannabis or are opposed to it, they're more amenable to things like capsules and whatnot, because that fits in better with their paradigm of what a medicine is, as opposed to crumbling up a plant and smoking it, which feels more like tobacco or something that's fun, as opposed to something that heals you, right? So I think that's a common perception.
It might be of interest to people. Two things. One is about the money that's there. Like, there was a very well publicised case in Queensland where a father was treating his daughter with cancer with drops, hemp oil drops to treat the cancer, and epilepsy. I think she was a Dravet syndrome child.
That's very common, absolutely.
But it was all complicated because there was a marriage breakdown and the ex-wife opposed it, and he ended up being arrested a couple of times, and then the child was taken to Brisbane, Royal Brisbane Hospital. He was not supposed to see the child and so on, and he broke bail, and he ended up. But those people, through a Facebook campaign, raised about 50 grand to get him out, to keep him out of jail, basically. That's what it ended up. He just ended up with a fine. So there was a huge amount of sympathy for that. It was complicated because of the marriage breakdown. But there are people out there who are prepared to support something like that. The other thing I'd say is that what's weird in Australia is that the left has been trying to legalise cannabis for 30 or more years. And I successfully moved the motion at a Labor Party conference in 1981 to decriminalise cannabis. I just accidentally happened to be a delegate, the funny thing about that was that when I drew the attention of Wayne Gossett, Labor campaign to that particular policy, he got a change. He went out and just got a change. So there's always been this problem when you get policies through a political party, but politicians just feel free to either ignore it or take it as they please. So that's one thing. But the really strange thing in Australia is that this cannabis movement at the moment to legalise, it came from the conservative side of politics. It came from Lucy Haslam and her son, Ben Haslam in Tamworth. His father was a drug squad copper in Tamworth. And son developed a bowel cancer in his early 20s. He went for 2 or maybe 3 years with standard treatments. He was getting very, very, very sick. And then some friend of his said, try this joint. And his mother, who's also a very conservative person, just said there was this amazing change. And suddenly he had an appetite, suddenly he felt much better, suddenly his nausea was gone, and also his mood, all those things just happened just with a couple of puffs on a street, the much maligned street cannabis, product. So then they started a campaign, they convinced their local National Party Conservative politician, they convinced the Premier of New South Wales, Conservative politician, and the movement started from that, and it's gone through to a federal kind of legislation which has opened up the avenue for cultivation in Australia at the very minimum. That's what they're prepared to do. And Queensland has got a bill to provide medicinal cannabis to people, but I don't think it will work because they don't address the supply problem. And Victoria has just looked at, they had an excellent report produced by the Victorian Law Reform Commission, which just said, forget about the Commonwealth, forget about reporting it, it's not going to happen, no one's going to agree to it, no country's going to agree to it. You have to generate local supply, and the Victorian government has taken on the whole industry and said, we'll license people to grow, produce quality product, which will then be doctors and pharmacists from go to well, we will manage the whole process, and we're not going to, the Commonwealth, we're not going to take any notice of what the Commonwealth is doing. So in Queensland, they said, oh yeah, they produced a bill which is 140 pages of all these clauses and so on, all because cannabis is legal, kind of, and they just do not address the supply issue. They just say, oh, the Commonwealth will supply, or people can import from overseas. And we have one person in Queensland who's tried to import a cannabis product from overseas, and 12 months later she still hasn't got it. So that's just an impossible process because the Commonwealth, the TGA, it makes it incredibly difficult to do that. So Queensland, there was the Greens had a federal bill which would set up a federal regulator to oversee the whole cannabis, medicinal cannabis industry and go to work. The Liberal National Party rejected that, which was, and as predicted, states are going off in their own direction. So we have this incredibly big difference between what Victoria is proposing and what Queensland is proposing. And Queensland, we've said from the Civil Liberties Council, is set to the minimum and to meet with them possibly this week. It just won't work because who is going to supply? And anecdotally, a friend of mine who's been speaking to Queensland Times said it's just too expensive. You've got to set up high security fence, hire all these security people just to grow some cannabis. It's just not working. So we have this crazy situation now where Victoria may well succeed in what they're doing, although of course it's restricted to doctors and pharmacists and that kind of medical model. But it may actually succeed in getting something to the people who need it on a scale. But the Queensland legislation is just not going to do it.
Thank you for your comments. So that's I found the same thing in Canada and other countries where sometimes the law changes, but the bureaucracy doesn't, or they give you an appearance of agreeing, but any one of dozens of agencies can say no, and if any of them say no, then it all gets locked. So some say yes, and the other guys are going to say no further down the line, and those kind of things are very challenging. But it does give you a situation where if somebody is providing medical cannabis or is moving forward, they can say, well, look, we've agreed this is something we want to do. I'm just doing what the government wants to do. And it gives you a bit of a backing when they at least acknowledge that cannabis has medical value and the government's acknowledging, instead of saying we'd like to do something if only we could, whatever, have the power of that we already have. And But I think that does still helps, right? But that kind of bureaucratic nonsense, I mean, it went a long time in Canada from when we fought in court to when one company was allowed to grow cannabis, and they had to destroy their whole first crop because there was too many kinds, and the government only wanted them to have one kind for studying, and then the next batch was too potent, they had to mix the stock into it, and I mean, these kind of things take years and years, but it's all forward progress in that regard. At least they're talking about cannabis, at least they're being forced to acknowledge it's got some medical benefit. You know, those are all positive things, even though everything you just said sounds so incredibly frustrating to have to deal with. It is all very positive that you're moving forward and moving the debate forward in that way.
Next weekend is a medical conference in Sydney that has organised at the November year before last. And that little girl is been sent home to die.
Yeah, I would add that Lucy Haslam, her son died about a year ago, but she's been an incredible campaigner, and now she's bought 40 acres or something near somewhere, and she's going to start cultivating and so on. But she's waiting for the New South Wales government to agree to that, and if anyone can do it, she can do it. And she's talking about providing medicinal cannabis for thousands of people. So, again, it's sort of this very strange situation.
Well, I mean, you've got a situation where, you know, there's a lot of public support for that. You're saying people are interested. Normally, someone is saying they're going to provide cannabis to children is not looked upon very favorably by the media, but when it's their own child or someone whose life depends on it, things really change.
Yeah.
And I think those are the kind of cases that are very powerful, that transforms people's perception of what a cannabis user is from their own stereotype in their mind to a child who's going to die without it. And, you know, and certainly I see at my events and things like this, that the people that come out for cannabis come from every demographic group, every type of person, from young and old, different backgrounds, different ethnicities. They're all, you know, there's a unifying force behind that. But I hope that other parents whose kids are like, oh, my kid's got this. Oh, maybe that'll help. Maybe I didn't know that was going to help. Maybe I'll try that too. And that as this spreads, it becomes more and more powerful and more effective. But it's really sad that we've got children that are martyrs to prohibition and to the drug war that have to die under such terrible circumstances when this plant could help them. But hopefully their experience will help somebody else from having to go through the same experience in the future. And that something positive will come out of that loss.
Yeah, I was just thinking that we should close the meeting down. Now, you can sort of hang around and, you know, people wanting to keep discussing, you can, but you've done this sort of marvellously, you know, you could speak for 3 hours, it's fantastic.
There's questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah.
We can talk personally too.
Yeah.
Or whatever, that's fine.
Yeah. You know, so I just think we should all sort of wrap it here. And if you want to buy any Danish books, you can buy them and get a autograph them, and you can sort of hang around and ask questions of Daniel and well, they're
Thanks for having us, everybody, and thanks for being here.
Come our way and say, pull up marijuana in your car. My president said, yes, officer, I do. I have an own car. Then he showed the officer a card, and the officer said, okay, be on your way and have a good day. Mr. President, you know what kind of car that car is from? He said, no matter the American marijuana car to the officer. Just know that the but I think that's the way the just give me the car like this,
Hey, thank everybody for their donations. It's really good.
I used to put it up on the Disco Sista, but then I give it to John as well.